The lost teachings of Jesus, the untold truths. In the dim light of the ancient scrolls, buried deep within the secret chambers of a forgotten monastery, there are whispers of truths lost to time. These are not the teachings we know today, the ones passed down through generations, revered and enshrined in sacred texts. No, these are the fragments of a story, hidden words, long erased, buried beneath layers of history, politics, and human fear. The teachings of Jesus Christ have shaped civilizations, guided millions, and provided hope to the desperate. But what if there were teachings we never knew? What if, deep within the veils of history, there existed forgotten messages that could change everything we thought we knew about faith, life, and our place in the world? The search for these lost teachings has captivated scholars, mystics, and theologians for centuries. Some believe that the true message of Jesus was too radical, too profound for the world to accept. Others claim that these teachings hold the key to understanding not just the spiritual world, but the practical wisdom that can help us navigate the complexities of our lives today. What if these lost lessons could provide the answers we desperately seek about love, power, purpose, and the deep meaning of existence? As the sun sets over a quiet village, a figure cloaked in shadow stands at the entrance of an ancient library. The air is thick with the weight of secrets, and as the doors creak open, the figure steps inside, eager to uncover the lost wisdom of Jesus. What awaits them is more than just knowledge, it is a journey into the unknown, a path that could change the world as we know it. In this story, we will uncover the fragments of Jesus' teachings that have been hidden from the world for centuries. These are not the teachings of religion or dogma, but the raw, untamed truths that could revolutionize how we see ourselves and the world around us. Through these lost teachings, we will explore not only the spiritual dimensions of existence, but also how they can be applied to our daily lives, how they can guide us in our relationships, in our work, and in our search for meaning in a modern world that often seems lost in confusion. What are the teachings that were lost? And why were they hidden away? Who are the people who dared to preserve them? And why have they remained a secret for so long? As we journey through these hidden truths, we will come to realize that they are not just relics of a forgotten past, they are living principles that can still shape our lives today, guiding us through the darkness into the light of understanding, love, and wisdom. As the figure cloaked in shadow walks deeper into the ancient library, the scent of old parchment and dust fills the air. This is no ordinary library, it is a place that has been preserved through centuries, hidden from the eyes of the world, where only those with a deep understanding of history and faith can hope to unlock its secrets. The scholar's heart beats faster with every step, knowing that within these walls lie the fragments of a long-lost truth. It is said that during the early years of Christianity, there were teachings of Jesus that were too radical, too different from what the established authorities could accept. These teachings, in their raw form, posed a threat to the status quo, challenging the very structure of religious and societal norms. The powers that be, fearful of the potential upheaval, decided that these teachings must be erased, buried, or rewritten. Yet, some of them, despite the attempts to obliterate them, survived in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge once more. The scholar's fingers gently trace the edges of an old scroll, its surface worn by time but still holding the faint traces of ancient ink. It is here, in these hidden scrolls, that the first teachings of Jesus, lost for centuries, are about to be revealed. The light from a single candle flickers, casting long shadows on the walls as the scholar carefully unrolls the parchment, revealing the first words of wisdom. Do not seek to be great among men, but seek greatness in the way you serve others. This was the first teaching, and it resonated deeply within the scholar's heart. It was a message that spoke not only of humility but of the power in service, a concept that could change the course of one's life. The idea that true greatness comes not from authority or recognition, but from the quiet, often unseen acts of kindness and service. It was a teaching that went against everything the world had come to embrace, a world obsessed with fame, power, and individual success. But Jesus, in his wisdom, had seen beyond the illusions of this world. His message was one of selflessness, urging his followers to focus not on what they could gain, but on what they could give. As the scholar read on, the second teaching emerged from the shadows of history. The kingdom of God is not a place to be found in the heavens, but within you. Seek it not in distant lands, but in the depth of your own heart. This was perhaps the most revolutionary of all the lost teachings, the idea that the divine, the sacred, the very kingdom of God, was not a far-off place to be sought after in the future, but something that already existed within each of us. It was a concept that transcended the traditional understanding of God's kingdom, which had been perceived as a distant, almost unreachable paradise. Instead, Jesus taught that the key to understanding God was not in rituals or external acts, but in the inner sanctity of one's soul. For the scholar, this was both an awakening and a burden. For centuries, humanity had looked to the heavens for answers, praying for guidance from a God seen as distant and separate. Yet, Jesus' teaching suggested that everything people sought in the external world had always been inside of them. The scholar paused, reflecting on how modern society often overlooks this simple but profound truth. People looked for fulfillment in wealth, status, and possessions, yet the peace and purpose they longed for could only be found within themselves. This teaching, if fully understood and embraced, could radically transform how people lived their daily lives. As the scholar continued through the scrolls, more teachings came into focus. These weren't just spiritual ideas, but practical wisdom meant to guide humanity through life's complexities. Do not fear the trials of this world, for they are but tests that shape your soul. It is through struggle that you grow, and through patience that you endure. This teaching was particularly relevant to the world of today, a world filled with uncertainty and fear. Whether it be personal struggles, economic hardships, or societal unrest, people often feel overwhelmed by the weight of their burdens. But Jesus' words were clear: it is not the absence of struggle that brings peace, but the strength to endure it with grace and wisdom. In the modern world, we often seek quick fixes, immediate solutions to our problems. Yet, Jesus' teaching reminded the scholar that true strength is found not in avoiding challenges, but in facing them head-on with patience and perseverance. The scholar's mind raced as they absorbed the teachings. How many times had they witnessed people in their own life struggling to find peace, constantly searching outside themselves for answers, when the solutions were waiting to be discovered within? How often did people run from their pain, their fear, instead of confronting it with courage and faith? These teachings spoke to the heart of human nature, the desire for comfort, the fear of the unknown, the yearning for certainty. Yet, Jesus had shown that the path to spiritual awakening and personal fulfillment lay in embracing the unknown, in trusting the journey, and in letting go of the need for external validation. Finally, the scholar reached the last fragment of the scroll, one that stood out among the others. It was a teaching that seemed almost out of place, yet it resonated with a power that could not be ignored. Forgive not just others, but yourself, for only in forgiveness can you truly experience freedom. Forgiveness, Jesus taught, was not a gift given to others alone. It was also a gift we must give ourselves. In a world where resentment and anger often take root in the heart, the idea of forgiving oneself might seem foreign to many. But Jesus, in his wisdom, understood that the greatest prison we create is the one inside our own hearts. The guilt, shame, and regret we carry from our past actions can bind us, preventing us from experiencing true peace and freedom. Only through self-forgiveness can one break free from this cycle and find the path to healing. The scholar's eyes welled up with tears as they read this teaching. It was a message that transcended time, a message that spoke directly to the human soul. It was not just about forgiving those who had wronged us, but about understanding that we, too, are worthy of forgiveness. In a world so quick to judge, so quick to condemn, this teaching reminded the scholar that grace is not reserved for the perfect, but for the broken, the lost, and the flawed. The teachings had begun to shape a new vision in the scholar's mind, a vision of a world where people lived not in the pursuit of power or success, but in the pursuit of truth, service, and love. It was a world where individuals saw the divine not in distant places but within themselves. A world where struggles were seen as opportunities for growth, and a world where forgiveness was the key to unlocking true freedom. As the scholar continued reading through the ancient scrolls, the words seemed to leap off the page, each one holding a truth so profound that it resonated deep within the very core of their being. The lost teachings of Jesus were not just about spiritual enlightenment, they were about living in harmony with the world, facing life's challenges with strength, and understanding the power of love and forgiveness. One teaching that particularly struck the scholar was a fragment that read, Do not seek to change the world. Instead, change yourself, for the world reflects what you are. This simple yet powerful statement challenged the very foundation of human ambition. The modern world was obsessed with changing external circumstances, focusing on altering the world through politics, social movements, and economic systems. Yet, Jesus' message turned this idea on its head. He taught that true transformation begins within. If we want to see change in the world, we must first look inward, examine our hearts, and seek to improve ourselves. The scholar paused, contemplating this profound teaching. In today's world, where people often look to external solutions to fix internal problems, this teaching was more relevant than ever. Society placed a heavy emphasis on fixing the world's problems: poverty, inequality, climate change, yet it seemed to overlook the fact that these external issues were often reflections of the inner turmoil of humanity itself. Wars were waged, conflicts erupted, and divisions deepened, not because the world itself was inherently flawed, but because the hearts and minds of its people were. This teaching was a reminder that in order to heal the world, we must first heal ourselves. The scholar realized that this was not just a spiritual principle, it was a practical one. In their own life, how often had they tried to fix relationships, work problems, or societal issues without first looking at their own role in creating those problems? How many times had they sought external solutions, blaming the system, society, or others, when the real work needed to be done within? This lesson was one of the most difficult to accept, but also one of the most freeing. By changing themselves, people could change the world. It was an invitation to take responsibility for one's own actions, thoughts, and behaviors, understanding that by shifting one's mindset, they could create a ripple effect that would extend far beyond their own life. The scroll continued to reveal teachings that, when combined, formed a blueprint for living a life of purpose, peace, and love. Another fragment read, "The one who seeks to be first must be last, for true power lies in humility and compassion." In a world that prized competition, individual achievement, and the accumulation of power, this teaching stood in stark contrast. Jesus taught that those who sought greatness through domination and control were blind to the true nature of power. The real power, according to his teachings, lay not in how much one could take, but in how much one could give. True greatness was not in being first, but in being last, serving others, lifting them up, and putting their needs before one's own. The scholar was struck by the depth of this teaching. In the modern world, where people were constantly striving to be at the top, to be the best, the richest, the most influential, this message felt like a breath of fresh air. It was a radical call to rethink how success was measured. Success, according to Jesus, was not about accumulating wealth or power, it was about lifting others up, sharing in their struggles, and showing compassion in the face of adversity. The scholar began to reflect on their own life. How often had they been consumed by the desire to rise above others? How often had they defined success by the position they held or the recognition they received? Yet, as they looked deeper into themselves, they realized that true fulfillment did not come from external accomplishments, but from the inner joy of helping others and being humble in their service. This teaching, although challenging, was liberating. It offered a path to true success, one that did not rely on ego or competition but on compassion, humility, and love, in a society that constantly told them to climb the ladder and reach the top. Jesus' words offered an alternative, a path that was not about self-promotion but selflessness. The next fragment the scholar uncovered was particularly striking, as it revealed another essential principle that could change the way people approached life. It read, "Love your enemies, for only by loving your enemies can you break the chains of hatred and fear that bind you." In a world filled with division, conflict, and animosity, this teaching struck a deep chord. Jesus taught that love was not only for those who loved us in return, but for those who opposed us, who hurt us, or who sought to bring us down. Loving one's enemies was not just an act of kindness, it was an act of liberation. It was a refusal to be bound by the chains of hatred, anger, and resentment. It was a choice to rise above the negativity and transcend the cycles of conflict that plagued human existence. For the scholar, this teaching was both a challenge and a revelation. In a world where revenge and retribution were often seen as justifiable responses to wrongdoing, Jesus' message offered a completely different path. To love one's enemies required great strength. It required forgiveness, understanding, and the ability to see beyond the surface of a person's actions to the deeper, often wounded, humanity within them. The scholar knew this teaching had the power to transform the world if it were truly embraced. How many conflicts could be avoided if people chose to love their enemies instead of vilifying them? How many relationships could be healed if individuals chose forgiveness over bitterness? Understanding over judgment? Jesus' teaching was not just about personal peace, it was about global reconciliation. It was a call to end the cycles of violence that had plagued humanity for millennia, to break free from the chains of hatred that kept societies divided. The scholar continued to read, uncovering more of the lost teachings, each one more profound than the last. Each fragment carried with it not only spiritual wisdom but practical guidance that could be applied to everyday life. One of the final teachings read, "Seek the truth, for the truth will set you free. But be wary, for the truth is not always what you want it to be." This teaching was especially relevant in the modern world, where misinformation and self-deception were rampant. People often believed what they wanted to believe, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. But Jesus' words reminded the scholar that truth was not something to be manipulated or ignored. The truth was not always comfortable or convenient, but it was the only thing that could set humanity free. In today's world, where so many were caught in the trap of ideological echo chambers and fake news, the scholar understood the urgency of this message. The search for truth was not an easy one, but it was the path to true freedom. The scholar reflected on how often they had compromised on truth, opting for comfort or convenience instead of confronting the reality of situations. Jesus' message was clear: only by embracing the truth, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable, could humanity break free from the chains of ignorance and fear. As the scholar finished reading the scroll, they sat back, overwhelmed by the profound wisdom they had uncovered. These lost teachings of Jesus were not just relics of the past, they were timeless principles that had the power to shape the future. They were not just spiritual ideas, they were practical lessons for how to live a life of purpose, love, and service in a world that desperately needed healing. The scholar sat back, the scrolls now scattered across the wooden table in front of them, each one a testament to the hidden wisdom of the lost teachings. The faint candlelight flickered, casting long shadows against the stone walls of the ancient library. There, in the quiet solitude of this sacred space, the scholar realized that what they had just uncovered was far more than a historical curiosity. It was a call to action, a challenge to live a life more aligned with the very essence of what Jesus had taught, a life of humility, service, forgiveness, and love. As the scholar sat in reflection, they couldn't help but think of the world outside, a world that seemed to be increasingly driven by division, hatred, and the relentless pursuit of power. Wars raged, the rich grew richer, and the poor continued to suffer. The scholar had been searching for answers for years, seeking to understand how humanity could overcome its most profound struggles. They had spent years studying philosophy, history, and spirituality, but now they saw that the answers had been in front of them all along, hidden in plain sight in the teachings of Jesus. It was in these lost teachings that the scholar finally understood the true meaning of Christ's life and message. Jesus had not come to simply create a religion or to found a new institution. He had come to show humanity a path, one that transcended the material world and pointed directly to the divine. Jesus' teachings were not about blind faith or ritual, they were about living authentically, embracing love and compassion, and serving the world without expectation. The scholar's mind raced, piecing together the lessons learned over the past few hours. They thought back to the powerful message about changing oneself before seeking to change the world. How many people had they known who tried to fix their external circumstances, blaming the world for their problems, yet never took the time to look within? Jesus' teachings reminded them that true transformation began from within. Only when a person changes their heart, their thoughts, and their actions, can they expect to see true change in the world around them. And then there was the lesson about humility, the idea that greatness was not to be sought through power or status, but through service to others. The scholar had spent much of their life striving for success and recognition, chasing after the hollow promises of fame and wealth. Yet, Jesus' words cut through the illusion. True greatness, they realized, was not about being first or superior, but about uplifting others, showing compassion, and serving the greater good. In a society where competition and individualism were often celebrated, this lesson was not just important, it was urgent. It was a message that could transform relationships, workplaces, and communities. The scholars' hearts swelled as they recalled the teaching of loving one's enemies. This was not just an idealistic notion, it was a radical, world-altering principle. In a time when hatred seemed to permeate every corner of society, whether through politics, religion, or social divides, Jesus' teaching about loving those who opposed us was nothing short of revolutionary. It was the antidote to the poison of division. It was a challenge to look beyond our differences, to understand that everyone, even our enemies, was worthy of compassion and forgiveness. The scholar thought of the fractured world outside the ancient library. They thought of the countless lives marked by conflict, pain, and division, and yet, they knew that if these teachings were embraced on a global scale, the world could be transformed. If humanity could learn to forgive, to love, to serve selflessly, and to seek truth over comfort, the world would not only heal, it would flourish. But the scholar also knew that the path to such transformation was not easy. It would take effort, struggle, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. The world was not going to change overnight. But perhaps, the scholar thought, if they shared these teachings with others, if they could help just one person change the way they lived, the way they loved, the way they saw the world, then they would have fulfilled the true purpose of these teachings. For the lost teachings of Jesus were not meant to be hoarded or hidden, they were meant to be shared, to be lived, and to be passed on from one generation to the next. As the scholar closed the scrolls, they felt a sense of peace wash over them. The answers they had sought for so long were now clear. Jesus' teachings, lost for centuries, were not just relics of the past, they were timeless truths that had the power to heal, to inspire, and to change lives. These teachings were not just for those who followed Jesus in the past, they were for all people, at all times, in every corner of the world. The scholar stood, their mind clear, their heart full of purpose. They knew that it was time to share what they had learned. It was time to bring these teachings out of the shadows and into the light. The world needed them more than ever. And so, the scholar stepped out of the ancient library, carrying with him not just the scrolls, but the wisdom of a lifetime. They knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but they also knew that with every step they took in the direction of love, humility, and service, they would be walking the path that Jesus had paved, a path that would lead to healing, to transformation, and to a deeper understanding of the divine. The lesson to remember: in the end, the lost teachings of Jesus are not just a historical curiosity. They are a powerful guide for how we should live today. They call us to look within, to transform ourselves, to serve others with love, to forgive those who wrong us, and to seek the truth, no matter how difficult it may be to face. The teachings are not just for the past, they are for the present and the future. As we move forward in a world that is often divided and filled with uncertainty, we must remember the words that have been hidden for so long. For in these teachings lies the potential for true peace, true healing, and a love that transcends all boundaries. The scholar walked out into the world, knowing that the journey had just begun. It was time to share the lost wisdom of Jesus and, in doing so, help bring about the change that the world so desperately needed.